Well, good morning. First of all, let me thank all of our colleagues, all of our allies for joining us here. Also, I just must acknowledge Win Without War and the Friends Committee on National Legislation and all of our allies and partners in this fight to repeal the overly broad 2001 authorization for the use of military force. I just want to thank all of you for, as we say in my district, staying woke and helping us get to this point. Very quickly, let me remind you of what happened yesterday. The Committee on Appropriations passed our amendment to repeal the 2001 AUMF 8 months after enactment of this fiscal year in terms of the Defense Department's bill, the appropriations bill. Once signed, we have 8 months to debate and to vote on a new authorization. The prior 2001 authorization, which I did not vote for, it was a blank check, 60 words. That resolution, that authorization was passed in 3 days. You can't tell me that we can't debate and pass an authorization or not based on the new realities, the wars that we have been involved in without authorizations. And that's all that this authorization would require in terms of the appeal. More than 75% of members currently serving in Congress were not serving when the 2001 authorization to use military force passed. And our constituents sent us to Congress to make the hard decisions. We owe it to the American people to take these tough votes and repeal the 2001 authorization. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger. Thank you very much for your support and your vote and your speaking up on behalf of this repeal. And I would like to now ask my colleague and sister in the struggle for many years from Illinois, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, to come forward. And I want to thank you, Jan, for your consistent support.
Well, I'm very grateful to all of you from the media that are here. This is such an important debate. But mostly I'm grateful to Congresswoman Barbara Lee from the start, as you well know, has been opposing the United States getting involved in war. Article 1 of the Constitution grants Congress, and Congress alone, the power to declare war. Over the years, this solemn responsibility vested to Congress by the Founding Fathers has been dangerously eroded. And today the American people have far less control over if and when the country goes to war, as we should and as they should. In September 2001, 1 week after the horrific attack on our country, Congress passed the authorization for the use of military force, AUMF, granting President Bush the authority to attack those responsible for the 9/11 as well as any, quote, associated force, unquote. This authorization had no expiration date on it and remains in force today. Think of that, 2001. For this last 18 years, American presidents have used their authority to conduct war all over the world without congressional approval, even against those far removed from the 9/11 attack and outside the scope of the 2001 authorization. It is long overdue that Congress take back the authority to go to war. It is time to repeal the 2001 blank check AUMF authority and to replace it with a new authorization on a case-by-case basis. And as Congresswoman Lee said, we'll have time under this new under the new law that was passed in Appropriations Committee. My friend and colleague Barbara Lee, all of you should remember, was the only member of Congress to vote against the 2001 AUMF authorization. At the time, she noted that it was too broad and that it would allow the executive branch to declare war without debate, and she was right. That is why I am proud to stand with her today to call for the repeal of the 2001 AUMF. The executive branch must cooperate with Congress, regarding military affairs. And again, and always, I want to thank Barbara Lee for her vision at that very moment to say, no, it was too broad. Now we have an opportunity to repeal it. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Jen. Thank you for those very spirited and very kind words, and for reminding us of what that blank check said, and it actually was 60 words. And it was so broad until it captured almost every military operation in perpetuity, quite frankly, until we do what we did yesterday and move this forward in terms of the repeal. So thank you again, Congresswoman Schakowsky. Okay, now I'd like to ask Erica Fine to come up, who's been with us for so many years, helping us to get to this moment. She is the advocacy director of Win Without War, which is a great organization that believes by democratizing U.S. foreign policy and providing progressive alternatives, we can achieve peace, a more just foreign policy, common sense policies that ensure that we have smart security, and that the three pillars of our foreign policy, diplomacy, development, and defense, are in balance and adhered to as we move toward our goals of global peace and security. So thank you again, Erica, for being here. Erica is going to moderate the press conference for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and to all the members who are standing up here with us. My name is Erica Fine. I'm the Advocacy Director at Win Without War. And Congresswoman Lee is a personal hero of mine as the lone voice to vote against the 2001 AUMF and really having that foresight about what it meant for our country wading into endless war. Win Without War has hundreds of thousands of affiliated activists, and we are working to change foreign policy in Washington. And we really know that the 21st century challenges that we face will not be solved at the barrel of the gun. And I just want to say also, for those following on the live stream, you can check out our social media guide at Win Without War on our Twitter handle. And it's my pleasure now to introduce the lead Republican co-sponsor of Representative Lee's AUMF repeal bill, Representative Thomas Massie.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Lee, for your leadership on this issue. This is not a partisan issue, and that's why I'm here today. It doesn't matter whether your favorite founding father was Hamilton or Madison or Jefferson or Washington. They all recognize the wisdom of leaving the power to declare war in the legislative branch and the danger of letting the executive branch have that power. And that's why they locked it up here in the legislative branch. As Ms. Lee stated, there are only about 70 members of Congress out of the 435 that are serving today who are actually here for the original AUMF vote. And I can tell you, those 70 who voted for it never imagined, except perhaps Barbara Lee imagined, that this would be used to justify all of the wars that have gone on since then and all the military engagements and possible future engagements from here on out. The president says that he doesn't want war with Iran, and I believe him. That the easiest way not to have war with Iran is not to start a war with Iran. He is not authorized, nor is any president authorized, to commit an act of war against any other country without a declaration from Congress. And I think it's important that we remember that power rests here in Congress and in Congress alone. Ms. Lee's idea is a great idea. It's to repeal the overly broad AUMF that's been used to justify so many unconstitutional military engagements. If we can't do that, if we can't bring ourselves to do that, then I've co-sponsored a bill with Representative Andy Levin that would clarify the AUMF and state unambiguously that neither of the two AUMFs that are outstanding would justify a war with Iran today. So please take a look at that bill and take time to thank Andy Levin for leading that. And with that, I will yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next up, we will hear from Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger, who serves Maryland's 2nd Congressional District. And I just want to thank him for his amendment yesterday to end U.S. support for the authorization to end U.S. support for the for the Saudi-led coalition's military intervention in Yemen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, good morning. What a great day today, and hopefully we can move forward. First thing, I want to tell a quick story. It was June 29th, 2017, and myself and my fellow appropriators were getting ready to pass the defense spending bill when Congresswoman Barbara Lee stood up to offer an amendment. Now, we all knew what it was going to be about. She voted against the current AUMFs back in 2001. Congresswoman Lee has been an army of one, bound and determined to repeal it, and she's been a woman on a mission, and we weren't wrong. Being a centrist from a military-heavy district, which includes NSA, I knew I would not be supporting her amendment to sunset the AUMF. But then something happened. Congresswoman Lee began speaking passionately about how the current AUMF has been used to justify military force in 30 countries over the last 18 years, including Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. It's essentially been used as a blank check for war. She pointed out that most members of Congress in office today were not in office in 2001. They have not had the opportunity to assert their constitutional right to weigh in on this very important issue. We're not fighting the same wars we once were, she said. For the sake of human rights, national security, and the safety of our men and women in uniform, Congress must return to the table and debate the issues, she said. She changed my mind that day, and many others, including the other side of the aisle. The amendment passed with a bipartisan support and a voice vote, and I mean a voice vote. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it done on the House floor, but it gave us a lot of momentum, and I think we can get this bill passed. This time the time is now, especially as the administration escalates tensions in Iran. It's long past time for Congress to repeal our current authorizations, debate the issues, and pass the new authorizations if Congress deems it appropriate. I'm proud to support it, and again, Barbara Lee, thank you very much for your leadership and your persuasive arguments to help us come here today.
Thank you, Congressman Ruppersberger. That was a really great story. And next up, we will hear from Congressman Jerry Mcnerney, who represents California's 9th Congressional District.
Well, good morning, and I'm glad to be here. First of all, I want to thank my friend and colleague Barbara Lee for her long-term and consistent opposition to using the authorization for the use of military force over and over and over in our nation's recent history. And I want to thank my colleagues for joining us in opposing the use of that provision. Now more than ever, we need to reassess and reassert Congress's responsibility and congressional authority over the United States use of military force. This is an essential check on a reckless administration that's demolishing decades of diplomatic precedent while provoking our adversaries and our allies alike. From the Gulf of Tonkin to Iraq, our nation has already suffered through too many unjustified and endless wars that have been fueled by fear-mongering and falsehood. No one person should decide the fate of thousands of men and women who serve in our armed forces. It's time to put this critical authority back into the hands of the American people, the people that we in Congress were elected to represent. So today we're going to move forward to overturn this authorization for the use of military force that's been used over and over. We're going to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And we will next hear from Dianne Randall, who's the Executive Secretary of the Friends Committee on National Legislation.
Thank you, Erica. Today we are here to celebrate Congressman Lee's extraordinary achievement and to encourage the onward momentum by Congress to revoke the blank check for war that the 2001 Congress handed to the President. Representative Lee rightly predicted, even before it was enacted, that the 2001 authorization for the use of military force would be abused. As we gather here today, the United States is now in its 18th year of war. 3 presidents have used the 2001 AUMF to wage endless war around the globe, and for 18 years, Congress has not taken its responsibility to consider the very grave decision to wage wars. Young men and women may be sent to fight in wars that were last voted on before they were even born. 80% of current members of Congress have never taken a vote about whether to send them into harm's way. This effort isn't only about ensuring that war is not waged without permission, it is about ensuring that war is not waged at all. As a Quaker organization, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, along with many other faiths, is helping to create a world in which justice prevails and peace abides. If we have learned anything in the last 18 years of ever-expanding wars without ends, it is that there are no military solutions to the problems that our globe faces. We are going to have to do the hard work of diplomacy and development and peace building if we want to protect ourselves and others from oppression, injustice, and violence. We have an over-militarized approach to foreign policy right now with devastating and destabilizing effects. 500,000 people have been killed in these wars, including some 250,000 civilians and nearly 7,000 U.S. service members. This is not how our democratic political system is supposed to work, and the American people know it. The grassroots network of the Friends Committee across the country, engaged citizens from every state, are demanding that their elected officials reclaim their power and fulfill their responsibilities under the Constitution. Our advocacy teams work on a nonpartisan basis, often alongside veterans groups, to ask their representatives and senators to support efforts like that of Congressman Lee to finally repeal this law and force Congress to debate and vote on U.S. wars. While we are celebrating today, we still have much work to do, and in recent weeks, our task has become even more urgent. The administration has dangerously escalated the risk of war with Iran, suggesting that an attack against Iran could be authorized under the 2001 AUMF. This is clearly not what Congress intended. But if President Trump starts a war with Iran, it is Congress that the American people will hold responsible. Unless they join Representative Lee and the other members here and those who have support standing up against this abuse of power, their silence will be heard as complicity. As Quakers, we seek a world free of war and the threat of war, and a U.S. foreign policy based on respect and cooperation rather than threats and coercion. I want to thank those members who are here today and those who voted on the Appropriations Subcommittee yesterday. We want to thank all those who are sponsoring the repeal of the 2001 AUMF and for making the hard and courageous decisions with which voters have entrusted them. We owe Representative Lee a debt of gratitude for standing up when no one else would, and for continuing her persistent and relentless efforts for peace. Today, we renew our commitment to fully repeal the 2001 AUMF and bring an end to endless wars. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Before we open it up for questions, I'm going to make a few final remarks. And as we approach Memorial Day, I think it's really important to remember that American service members continue to put their lives on the line for a war that began nearly 20 years ago, and some of them are still paying the ultimate price. Others come home with trauma and wounds of war that they must live with for the rest of their lives. Service members deployed under the 2001 AUMF were babies or children when the vote to authorize was taken, as Dianne and others have mentioned. And we are using this AUMF to justify war in not just Afghanistan, but Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Niger, and other places. And in Afghanistan alone, the numbers are staggering. 40,000 Afghan security forces' lives have been lost since 2014. Now the United Nations estimates that more civilians are being killed by Afghan government and American forces than the Taliban or other insurgents. And just last week, you may have missed it, the American forces accidentally bombed Afghan police unit, killing between 8 and 17 people. So we know it's really past time to carry out what happened yesterday, which was the adoption of Ms. Lee's amendment, and it's time for Congress to pass the legislation to repeal the AUMF once and for all, and to determine what makes sense now and into the future. So, with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Erica. And let me thank you and our colleagues, Congressman Massey and Ruppersberger, for being here today. But more importantly, the work that you're doing each and every day on behalf of our efforts for global peace and security, regardless of our party, where we're coming from on issues in terms of ideology. We come together when we care about making sure that our young men and women are not sent into harm's way without the backing and the support of Congress. And we must do our job because we have been missing in action. Today I'm thinking of two people as we open up for questions. One is our beloved, the late Walter Jones. I think, and I know Walter would be standing here with us because he was so committed and so dedicated to two things. One, protecting our troops, and two, making sure that members of Congress do their job in the protection of our Constitution and our troops. And so we miss him tremendously. And Congressman Jones, like Congressman Massey, of course, we're Republicans, and we have other Republican support. So today I just want to honor and remember Walter. Secondly is my dad. My dad was a lieutenant colonel in the military, 25 years. He served in World War II and in Korea. Garvin Alexander Tutt. And my dad, when I voted against this blank check in 2001, he was the first one who called me. And toward the end of his life, instead of calling him Daddy, of course, he wanted me to call him Colonel Tutt.